Welcome everyone here this morning. For those of you who were here with us last night, welcome back. It was certainly inspiring and educational last night, a wonderful beginning to conversation and study about Kabbalah. And if we want to learn about Kabbalah, there's certainly nobody better than Dr. Daniel Matt to join and to learn with. I wanted just to welcome you on behalf of the congregation and the Adult Education Committee. Brad Rauch and David Scott are our co-chairs, and they have done a truly magnificent job of coordinating a remarkable schedule for this year. And in the fall, not only did we have Koki and Steve Roberts and Rabbi Mark Glickman, I taught a class as well, but this spring or winter begins with Dr. Daniel Matt and continues with another schedule filled with opportunities to learn together. We're very grateful that you're here, very grateful for the support that comes to the Adult Education Committee, but it really is the people who not only fill the seats, as you are doing this morning, but also the people who help us to identify the very best that we can bring to Houston, to Beth Israel, to our community. So thank you for being here. The only request that we want to ask of you is that if you have any interest in getting more coffee or water, or a little nosh, to do it before the lecture actually begins so that Dr. Matt can speak uninterrupted and have your full attention. There's a lot to dive into in Kabbalah. So without further ado, my esteemed partner here, Brad Rauch, co-chair of Adult Education, who will make the introductions and other announcements. Thank you, everybody. Welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi. Many of you heard this introduction last night, so please bear with me while I do it again, because we have a lot of new faces this morning, and I'm very glad that y'all made it this morning. I know it's difficult to do a morning meeting, but with a speaker of this quality and the subject matter, which really requires a lot of intense concentration, I think it's wonderful that y'all came out this morning. We are very pleased to welcome Dr. Daniel Matt again. Dr. Matt is a leading authority in the study of Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, but also I would say the leading authority in the Zohar, which he has undertaken as his main job to translate 12 volumes, 6 of which are available here, and he has spent the last 12 years doing so, 14 years doing so, with another 3 years left to go before he finishes this endeavor. And it was funded by the Pritzker Foundation, and it's a monumental undertaking recognized in Jewish scholarship as one of the great seminal books of Judaism that he will make available to English readers. Dr. Matt has been a professor for 20 years. He has served in the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. He has also taught at Stanford and Hebrew University at Jerusalem. He has written over 10 books relating to Jewish mysticism. He has also appeared in Time Magazine, on the History Channel, as well as NPR. So would you please help me welcome Dr. Daniel Matt.
Thank you, Brad. It's great to be here, and I appreciate people getting up early for this event. What I'm presenting this morning is somewhat demanding. If I were just going to speak about Jewish mysticism, that would require quite a lot of attention. And if I were trying to describe the Big Bang or contemporary cosmology, the theory of the origin of the universe, to the extent that I can understand that, that's pretty demanding. To talk about both of them together is asking a lot, and it is 9 a.m., so I appreciate your bravery in coming. I'm going to speak for about 40 minutes, give or take an hour or two. And no, I'll speak for about 40 minutes, and afterward I'll be happy to take questions. What I'd like to ask is that when I finish, we just sit for a moment in silence, just to appreciate the silence, to let the words sink in a little bit, and then I'll be happy to take questions. I'm not going to answer them, but I'll be happy to. In the beginning was the Big Bang, 14 billion years ago. The primordial vacuum was devoid of matter, but not really empty, rather in a state of minimum energy, pregnant with potential, teeming with virtual particles. Through a quantum fluctuation, a sort of bubble in this vacuum, there emerged a hot, dense seed, smaller than a proton, yet containing all the mass and energy of our universe. In less than a trillionth of a second, that seed cooled and expanded wildly, faster than the speed of light, inflating to the size of a basketball. The expansion then slowed down, but it has never stopped. In its first few seconds, the universe was an undifferentiated soup of matter and radiation. It took a few minutes for things to cool down enough for nuclei to form, and at least 300,000 years for atoms to form. For eons, clouds of gas expanded. Huge glimmering balls of hot gas formed into stars. Deep within these stars, nuclear reactions gave birth to elements such as carbon and iron. When the stars grew old, they exploded, spewing these elements into the universe. Eventually, this matter was recycled into new solar systems. Our solar system is one example of this recycling, a mix of matter produced by cycles of stars, stars forming and exploding. We, along with everything else, are literally made of stardust. The Earth took shape and began cooling down about 4.5 billion years ago. By about 1 billion years later, various microorganisms had developed. Exactly how, no one knows. We do know that Earth's early atmosphere was composed of hydrogen, water vapor, carbon dioxide, and simple gases such as ammonia and methane. In such a climate, organic compounds may have synthesized spontaneously. Or perhaps life drifted to Earth in the form of spores from the planet Mars, or from another solar system in our galaxy, or another galaxy in the universe. However life began, all its forms share similar genetic codes and can be traced back to a common ancestor. All living beings are cousins. We humans like to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of creation. And it's true, we are the most complicated things in the universe. Our brain contains 100 billion cells, linked by 100 trillion synaptic connections. Yet we are part of the evolutionary process, descended from bacteria, who lived 3.5 billion years ago. In our mother's womb, each of us retraces the entire developmental span from amoeba to human being. Our species, Homo sapiens, is a primate that developed in Africa, splitting away from the chimpanzee line about 7 million years ago. We still share with the chimps 99% of our active genes. If you'll pardon the expression, we are an improved ape. The Big Bang is a theory, not a fact. To cosmologists, it offers the most convincing explanation of the evolution of the universe, the best approximation to truth that we currently possess. It may be proven wrong. More likely, it will eventually be enfolded within a larger theory. The scientific consensus is that the Big Bang theory is correct within its specific domain. In other words, it describes the evolution of our universe from perhaps 1/1000th of a second after its origin up to the present. Whatever happened before that first fraction of a second lies beyond the limits of the theory. The phrase Big Bang sounds like there was a definite beginning, a finite time ago. But the theory does not really extend that far. The ultimate origin of the universe is still unfathomed. Today, many cosmologists believe that there are actually multiple universes. If that's correct, perhaps we should translate the opening words of the Torah not as in the beginning, But in a beginning, God created heaven and earth. In fact, that represents a more literal rendering of the original Hebrew. Bereshit, in a beginning, as someone mentioned last night. Science has no consensus on the ultimate origin. Some theories espouse a well-defined beginning. Others, like Stephen Hawking's, do not. But both suggest a radically new reading of Genesis. If God spoke the world into being, the divine language is energy. The alphabet, elementary particles. God's grammar, the laws of nature. Many scientists have sensed a spiritual dimension in the search for these laws. For Einstein, discerning the laws of nature was a way to discover how God thinks. But does the universe have a purpose? Is there meaning to our existence? Why should we live ethically? Here, cosmology cannot help us very much. Charles Darwin intensifies our problem. Are we different from other animals? Can we transcend violence and savagery? As the wife of an Anglican bishop remarked, upon hearing of Darwin's theory, descended from apes? My dear, let us hope that it is not true. But if it is, let us pray that it will not become generally known. Her comment echoes the fear that knowing the true nature of our ancestors threatens to unravel the social fabric. We have lost our myth. A myth is a story, imagined or true, that helps us make our experience comprehensible by offering a construction of reality. It's a narrative that transforms chaos into order. We're not content to see events as unconnected, as inexplicable. We crave to understand some underlying order in the world. A myth tells us why things are the way they are, where they came from. Such an account is not only comforting, assuring, and socially useful, it's essential. Without a myth, there is no meaning or purpose to our life, just vast emptiness. Myths do more than explain. They guide our mental processes, conditioning how we think, even how we perceive. Myths come to life by serving as models for human behavior. On Friday evening, as my family begins Shabbat, I sometimes imagine God, having created the world in one very packed week, finally taking a break. According to the Torah, Shabbat vayinafash. God rested and was refreshed. This mythical image enables me to pause, to slow down, to appreciate creation. By observing Shabbat, I'm imitating the divine. Order reemerges out of the impending chaos of life. But what do we do when the myths of tradition have been undone? When the God of the Bible seems so unbelievable? Is there really someone up there in control, charting the course of history, reaching down to rescue those in need, tallying up our good and bad deeds for reward and punishment? Many people have shed the security of traditional belief. They're more likely to experience a gaping, aching void than the satisfying fullness of God's presence. If people believe in anything these days, it's more likely to be science and technology. And what does science provide in exchange for this belief? Progress in every field except for one, the ultimate meaning of life. Some scientists insist that there is no meaning. As one leading physicist has written, Texan Jewish physicist, the more we know about the universe, the more it is evident that it is pointless and meaningless. Stephen Weinberg. The Big Bang is a contemporary creation story. Energy turns into matter, which turns back into energy. There's no precise plan for creation worked out in advance. Rather, by an intricate and unrepeatable combination of chance and necessity, humanity has evolved from and alongside countless other forms of life over billions of years. Ultimately, our evolutionary history is uplifting. It enables us to see that we are part of a wholeness, a oneness. To be religious means, in the words of another contemporary physicist, to have an intuitive feeling of the unity of the cosmos. This oneness is grounded in scientific fact. We are made of the same stuff as all of creation. Everything that is, was, or will be started off together as one infinitesimal point, the cosmic seed. Life has since branched out, but this should not blind us to its underlying unity. The deepest marvel is the unity in diversity, the vast array of material manifestations of energy. Becoming aware of this multifaceted unity can help us learn how to live in harmony with other human beings, with all beings, with all our fellow transformations of energy and matter. If the Big Bang is our new creation myth, the story that explains how the universe began, then who is God? God is a name we give to the oneness of it all. How can you name oneness? How can you name the unnameable? The Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition, offers a number of possibilities. One is Ein Sof. Literally, there is no end. Ein Sof is the infinite. Or to borrow a phrase from the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart, the God beyond God. Sometimes the Kabbalists use a more radical name than Ein Sof. This is the name Ayin, nothingness. We encounter this bizarre term among Christian mystics too. John Scotus Erigena, writing in Latin, calls God nihil. Meister Eckhart in German, nicht. John of the Cross in Spanish, nada. To call God nothingness does not mean that God does not exist. Rather, it conveys the idea that God is no thing. God animates all things and cannot be contained by any of them. God is the oneness that is no particular thing, no thingness. This mystical nothingness is neither empty nor barren. It is fertile and overflowing, engendering the myriad forms of life. The mystics teach that the universe emanated, the universe emerged out of divine nothingness. Similarly, as we have seen, cosmologists speak of the quantum vacuum, teeming with potential, engendering the cosmic seed. This vacuum is anything but empty, a seething froth of virtual particles, constantly appearing and disappearing. How did the universe emerge out of this prolific nothingness? According to Kabbalah and the Big Bang Theory, this transition was marked by a single point. Physicists call this point a singularity, an infinitely dense point in space-time. A singularity is both destructive and creative. Anything falling into a singularity merges with it, losing its identity, while energy emerging from a singularity can become anything. The laws of physics do not apply to that split second in which energy or mass emerges. According to the 13th century Kabbalist Moses de Leon, quote, "The beginning of existence is the secret concealed point. This is the beginning of all the hidden things, which spread out from there and emanate according to their species. From a single point, you can extend the dimensions of all things." As emanation proceeds, as God begins to unfold, the point expands into a circle. Similarly, ever since the Big Bang, our universe has been expanding. We know this thanks to the astronomer Edwin Hubble, who measured the speed at which other galaxies are moving away from us. In 1929, Hubble determined that the farther a galaxy is from us, the faster it's moving away. The universe is expanding in all directions. It's not that the universe is expanding within space. Space itself is expanding. The most dramatic consequence of Hubble's discovery is what it tells us about the origin of the universe. Just play the Hubble tape in reverse. If the universe is now expanding, that means it was once much smaller. How small? According to Big Bang Theory, if we go back far enough in space-time, if we retrace the paths of the galaxies, the entire mass energy of the universe contracts into the size of a singularity, that infinitesimal point from which the cosmos flashed into existence. One Kabbalist writing in the 16th century understands expansion as part of the rhythm of creation. Quote, "With the appearance of the light, the universe expanded. With the concealment of the light, the things that exist were created in all their variety. This is the mystery of the act of creation. One who understands will understand." When light flashed forth, time and space began. But the early universe was an undifferentiated soup of energy and matter. How did matter emerge from the stew? The mystic writes that the light was concealed. A scientist would say that energy congealed. Matter is frozen energy. No nucleus or atom could form until some of the energy cooled down enough that it could be bound and bundled into stable particles of matter. Einstein discovered the equivalence of mass and energy. Ultimately, matter is not distinct from energy, but simply energy that has temporarily assumed a particular pattern. Matter is energy in a tangible form. Both are different states of a single continuum, different names for two forms of the same thing. Like the physicist, the mystic too is fascinated by the intimate relation of matter and energy, though the mystical description is composed in a different key. Material existence emerges out of ayin, that pool of divine energy. Ultimately, the world is not other than God, for this divine energy is concealed within all forms of being. If it were not concealed, there would be no individual existence. Everything would dissolve back into oneness or nothingness. Around the middle of the 16th century, in the mountaintop city of Safed in Galilee, the most famous Kabbalist who ever lived, Isaac Luria, pondered creation, and he asked himself, what came before? Luria believed there was only Ein Sof, God as infinity. I'll take that later. He believed there was only Ein Sof, God as infinity. But if Ein Sof pervaded all space, how could there be room for anything other than God? If there was only Ein Sof, how are we here at all? That's what Luria wanted to know. How could there be room for the world if infinity fills all that is? Luria concluded that the first act of creation could not be a divine flow, a divine emanation, a divine creative act. Rather, God had to withdraw and make some empty space for the world to exist. The way Luria describes this, quote, "Before the creation of the universe, Ein Sof withdrew itself into its essence, from itself, to itself, within itself. Within its essence, it left an empty space in which it could then emanate and create. This is known as Tzimtzum, which literally means contraction, but here suggests withdrawal, a withdrawal by which God made room for something other than God. The primordial void carved out by Tzimtzum became the site of creation, no larger than an infinitesimal point in relation to Ein Sof, yet spacious enough to house the cosmos. But the void was not really empty. It retained a trace, a residue of the light of Ein Sof, just as the vacuum preceding the Big Bang was not completely empty, but rather in a state of minimum energy, pregnant with creative potential and virtual particles. As Ein Sof began to unfold, a ray of light was channeled into the void through vessels. Everything went smoothly at first, but some of the vessels, less translucent, could not withstand the power of the light. They shattered. Most of the light returned to its infinite source, but the rest, falling as sparks, along with shards of the shattered vessels, was eventually trapped in material existence. Our task, according to Kabbalah, is to liberate these sparks of light, to restore them to divinity. By living ethically and spiritually, we raise the sparks and thereby bring about tikkun, the repair or mending of the cosmos. If the vessels had not broken, our world of multiplicity would not exist. We exist because we have lost oneness. Modern cosmology has a theory that parallels the breaking of the vessels. It's known as the theory of broken symmetry. Symmetry can be unstable. Picture yourself really exactly as we are now, almost exactly, sitting around circular tables, but imagine that it's a little more elegant event than a lecture by Daniel Matt. Imagine you're sitting at a fancy bar mitzvah, fancy bat mitzvah, a wedding dinner, say a wedding dinner. There are 11 other guests at this table. Champagne glasses have been placed precisely between each dinner plate and the next. That's what you would call perfect right-left symmetry. A waiter comes and fills the glasses with champagne, and everyone sits, waiting for someone else to lift the glass. You're a little thirsty, realizing that those pink bubbles won't last forever, you decide to take a sip. But which champagne glass should you pick? Not fully versed in the rules of etiquette, you could as easily choose the glass to your left as the one to your right. Either way, as soon as you reach for one or the other, the symmetry is broken. Unless everyone else does exactly what you've done, someone's going to have to reach across the table to get a glass. Let's take a more mundane example, more appropriate for an academic lecture. Imagine you're holding a handful of sharpened pencils. Okay, this is in the old days when there were sharpened pencils. Just snug enough that they stand on the points. Now let go. For a moment, the pencils remain balanced, rotationally symmetrical. Looking down from above, you see a perfect circle of pencil erasers. But of course, that symmetry is quickly broken. The pencils fall into a tangle of thick pickup sticks. The pencils are a metaphor for the universe. The jumble of fallen pencils is our universe today. The symmetrical bundle is the universe in its original state. One of the challenges of science is to discover the symmetry hidden within the tangle of ordinary life. The universe began in an extremely hot state of utmost simplicity and symmetry. As it expands and cools, this perfect symmetry is broken, giving rise to the world of diversity and structure that we inhabit. To us today, the fundamental forces of nature appear distinct: gravity, electromagnetism, and two other forces known as the strong and weak nuclear forces. The balance between these four forces determines the existence and behavior of everything in the visible universe. But originally, all four forces were linked, and today scientists dream of finding a single set of equations describing all four. By colliding subatomic particles, physicists have discovered that at extremely high temperatures, the differences between the forces begin to disappear. One final act of imagination. Imagine yourself journeying back in time, closer and closer to the moment, that primordial moment of the Big Bang. The further you go, the hotter and denser the universe becomes, and those broken symmetries are restored. You go back millions, billions of years. Finally, you reach the tiniest fraction of time that a physicist can imagine. 10 to the minus 43 second after the Big Bang. That's 1/10 millionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second after the beginning. Earlier than this is hard to probe. Why? The density of matter becomes so great that the structure and perhaps the meaning of space and time break down. At this point, all interactions between the fundamental forces are indistinguishable. Perfect symmetry. How did that symmetry of Bereshit, of the beginning, become so disguised over the course of time? As the universe expands and starts to cool, its radiation and particles lose energy, the various forces become distinct. Matter, meanwhile, is also losing its oneness. By the time the universe is 1/1000th of a second old, there are already 4 forces and 24 kinds of elementary particles. This fracturing of symmetry creates the particles of matter and energy found today around us and within us. Perfect symmetry may sound alluring, but it is sterile. If the primal force had not broken into 4 forces, the universe would be a very different place, if it existed at all. Tiny deviations from that complete oneness now give rise to nuclei, atoms, molecules, then galaxies, stars, planets, people. We exist today in our present condition, with all our flaws and imperfections, because of broken symmetry. Just as Kabbalah teaches that our jumbled, blemished reality derives from the breaking of the vessels. Broken symmetry and the breaking of the vessels are distinct theories, each generated by a different approach to the question of the origin of the universe. Yet their resonance is intriguing. Apparently, the human mind has devised alternative strategies, scientific and spiritual, to search for our origin. The two are distinct, but complementary. Science enables us to probe infinitesimal particles of matter, unimaginable depths of outer space, understanding each in light of the other as we grope our way back toward the beginning. Spirituality guides us through inner space, challenging us to retrace our path to oneness and to live in the light of what we discover. As we've seen, the Jewish mystics picture divine sparks in everything that exists. A scientist would say there is energy latent in subatomic particles. The spiritual task is to raise the sparks, to restore the world to God, to become aware that every single thing we do, or see, or touch, or imagine is part of the oneness, a pattern of energy. Raising the sparks is a powerful metaphor. It transforms religion from a list of do's and don'ts, or a list of dogmas, into spiritual adventure. God is not some separate being up there. She is right here, in the bark of a tree, in a friend's voice, in a stranger's eye. The world is teeming with God. Since God is in everything, you can serve God through everything. In looking for the divine spark, we discover that what is ordinary is really spectacular. The holy deed is doing what needs to be done now. The world is fractured, and God needs us to mend it. By mending the world socially, economically, politically, we mend God, whose sparks lie scattered everywhere. But we shouldn't fool ourselves. There will never be a complete tikkun, a complete mending of the world. Things will never be perfect. Society will never be completely just. How will it all end? Is there a Messiah coming to redeem us? Messiahs captivate our imagination because the world is so unfair. History is so fickle. When the Messiah comes, we are told everything will be set right. Good will finally triumph. Evil will be eliminated. That would be nice. But is it the way things work? What's the long-range future of our planet, according to science? Here's the forecast. The sun is about 5 billion years old, middle-aged, and reliable. But 5 billion years from now, the hydrogen fuel in the sun's core will run out. The core of the sun will sag while its atmosphere will mushroom, engulfing several of its closest planets, including Earth. Gradually, most of this atmosphere will fall away, leaving a hot, dense ball of inert matter. Life will not necessarily come to an end. By then, human beings will have developed the technology to move to another, safer solar system. Meanwhile, here we are. We still have quite a while until the year 5 billion. There will be no final perfection. No one has arranged the future ahead of time. Nothing is preordained. Chance will play a leading role in the way things unfold, as it always has. We should learn to negotiate with chance. We should work on mending our own brokenness, our social fabric, our planet, as best we can. What kind of God can we believe in? The Hebrew word emunah, belief, originally meant trust and faithfulness, both human and divine. Without trusting another person, we cannot love. Without trusting others, we cannot build and sustain community. But how can we trust the cosmos, or this God of oneness? We can trust that we are part of something greater, a vast web of existence, constantly expanding and evolving. When we gaze at the nighttime sky, we can ponder that we are made of elements forged within stars, out of particles born in the Big Bang. We can sense that we are looking back home. That's because the further we gaze into space, the further we see back into time. Why? If we see a galaxy 10 million light years away, we're really seeing that galaxy as it existed 10 million years ago. It's taken that long for its ancient light to arrive at our eyes. Beyond any star we will ever identify, beyond any quasar, lies the horizon of space-time, 14 billion light years away. But neither God nor the Big Bang is that far away. The Big Bang didn't happen somewhere out there, outside of us. Rather, we began inside the Big Bang. We now embody its primordial energy. The Big Bang has never stopped. And what about God? God is not an object or a fixed destination. There's no definite way to reach God. But then again, you don't need to reach something that's everywhere. God is not somewhere else hidden from us. God is right here, hidden from us. We're enslaved by our routines, rushing from event to event, from one chore to another. We rarely let ourselves pause and notice the splendor right in front of us. Our sense of wonder has shriveled, victimized by our pace of life. How then can we find God? A clue is provided by one of the many names of Shekhinah, the feminine aspect of God, the divine presence. In Kabbalah, she is called ocean, well, garden, apple orchard. She's also called Zot, a Hebrew word which means simply this. God is right here, in this very moment, fresh and unexpected, taking you by surprise. God is this. Questions? Is it crystal clear? Too confusing to even start? Please.
So tying in cosmology with mysticism, it's pretty well accepted that there's galaxies as numerous as what the sands of all the oceans.
Right.
Would mysticism accept that maybe God also planted seeds in other far distant galaxies, such as ours, that life could be evolving elsewhere, maybe as part of His plan?
Yeah, I think, you know, different mystics might approach it differently, but I think we have to be open to, you know, endless possibilities of life. We shouldn't be so egotistical to think that we're the pinnacle of existence. We have to expand our awareness, our spiritual awareness, and our scientific knowledge, and I think, you know, if we discover other life, to me, that's all the more reason for wonder and awe. Please.
I was reading about Steve. I know you mentioned about that today, the science, you know, being explored to the highest and not necessarily that, you know. But I was reading about Steve Jobs' last word from his sister, and he said, "Wow, wow, wow," 3 times. And many, of course, from the mystic scholars, they believe, of course, that death is not necessarily the end, but the beginning, and that wow, 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 that you must sing the Shekhinah, and that wonderful, beautiful splendor. And I wanted to know what you think about
Yeah, I mean, my attitude to what happens after death is to take a wait and see, But I would say, you know, it's certainly possible, and it's certainly in line with many descriptions that the individual soul, the individual spark of life reunites with the stream of life. You know, there's a kind of recycling of energy in one way or another. And certainly that's in line with how the Zohar would describe death is reunion. Like Rabbi Shimon, the hero of the Zohar, his death is described as a wedding celebration, because he's wedded to the Shekhinah. So that's very much in line.
You mentioned Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking.
With string theory, right?
Stephen Hawking, I mean, Stephen Hawking, you know, is really considered one of the leading cosmologists. He wasn't involved directly with string theory, but he's certainly open to that. String theory is now one you know, popular theory.
So doesn't string theory have a lot of similarities with probabilistic ideas?
Yeah, certainly. There are, you know, numerous dimensions, and some people add up the number of dimensions and try to relate them to gematria, to numerical value. I'm a little skeptical of that kind of connection. But certainly, once you talk about unknown dimensions, right? There's a new book on multiple universes by a very fine Jewish cosmologist at Columbia, Brian Greene. And his book is called The Hidden Reality. And so you walk to a bookstore and you see a book called The Hidden Reality. It's either about mysticism or about cosmology, very likely. And this one happens to be about cosmology. The thing is to, you know, not to limit ourselves to our current knowledge. That's what's so beautiful about science. You know, it's really, to me, it's a question: what can science and religion learn from each other? Right? One thing that science can learn from religion is to develop, to cultivate a sense of awe, of wonder. And the greatest scientists had this, right? Einstein, to him it was like, you know, to Newton and Einstein, Newton describes his discoveries as being a little boy walking on the beach and seeing a shell that he had never seen before. That's how he described it, the thrill of scientific discovery. So to develop a sense of awe, what can religion learn from science? One thing is not to be so fixated on dogma, on one particular belief system. Because as scientists, how does science proceed? Science proceeds by proving itself wrong. Right? A theory, there's a hypothesis, there's a theory, it's tested. And scientist is thrilled when his own theory gets disproven. Now, of course, ego enters in a little bit. Scientists like to win Nobel Prizes. But a scientist, his theory is proven wrong. To him, that's not the end of the world. It means now there's a new direction. For a religious thinker, the worst thing is to mention, oh, my belief system is wrong. So I think religion can learn from science not to be so fixated on a particular formulation. And luckily, we're in a tradition that values questioning and challenging. And that's certainly a healthier approach.
last night you alluded to the context in which the mystic tradition arose. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? With respect to its opposition to the Maimonides' conception of religion. Can you give us a little historical context?
Sure. It's a good brief question. Yeah, well, let's say, Kabbalah is said to emerge in the 12th and 13th centuries in Europe. It certainly has earlier roots, rabbinic roots, and biblical roots. But let's talk about the Jews in medieval Europe at the time. On the one hand, there are social challenges and there are intellectual challenges. So the social challenge is that, wait a minute, if God really chose the people of Israel, or, saved them, or redeemed them, how come the Christians are running the show? What's happened here? Isn't something out of sync? And there's great consternation. There's great, the Jews are troubled by the political setup, by the social power structure, and you find a lot of the Zohar is really talking about, why are the Jews downtrodden? Now, in Spain, actually, the Jews are in a better situation than in much of the rest of Europe. For example, in Spain, Jews were allowed to own property. In much of Northern Europe, at that point, Jews could not own property. It had to be formally Christian controlled. Jews were integrated into the political life in Spain. There were Jewish financiers, there were Jewish doctors, of course. There were Jewish diplomatic advisors. There were Jews giving advice to the King of Spain, King Alfonso. The King of Spain, it's very important, who was king at that time when the Zohar was written. Alfonso X. Okay, there are many Alfonsos, of course, Alfonso X, but this Alfonso was called Alfonso the Wise, Alfonso el Sabio, Alfonso the Wise. He was really a Renaissance figure. Usually we think of the Renaissance as 15th century, 16th century, 15th century Italy, Leonardo da Vinci, but there was a Renaissance happening in Spain in the 13th century. In Italy in the 12th century and in Spain in the 13th century, Alfonso commissioned people to translate books into Spanish. Now, Spanish almost did not exist as a language. There was no great body of Spanish literature at this point. It was called Castilian, medieval Spanish. Alfonso almost created Castilian. How? He hired Jews and Muslims to translate works of Greek philosophy into Spanish. From what? Not from Greek, from Arabic. Right? We all know the Arabs really kept Greek civilization alive. So there were many, many books of Plato, of Aristotle, and commentaries on Plato and Aristotle that existed in Arabic. And Alfonso asked Jews and Muslims, Jews who knew Arabic and Muslims who knew Arabic, to translate those books of philosophy, to translate Plato from Arabic into Castilian, to translate Aristotle from Arabic into Castilian. He created a whole library, a library of wisdom. So that's going on in the context of the Zohar, and Jews are involved in that project. In fact, Moses de Leon, who's writing the Zohar, might have tried to convince Alfonso, you're looking for ancient wisdom? Here's a book of ancient wisdom. This is written in the 2nd century, right? We talked about last night. I'm just copying out from an ancient book, whereas really he's writing it up himself. And there's some indication that he had an indirect connection to the court. And in fact, Alfonso's son says that his father was interested in Talmud and Kabbalah. The king of Spain at the time was interested in Kabbalah, and Moses de Leon was able to produce an ancient book of Kabbalah. Maybe it was actually part of this Renaissance project of gathering wisdom. So there are social pressures, and yet the Jews are more involved in Spain than elsewhere. But you have, actually in the Zohar, will be Rabbi Chia said, I was walking on the road and I met someone, and I met a bishop, and the bishop said to me, you say, God loves you, how come you guys are not in control? So the rabbi is able to come up with some explanation. Really, we will be vindicated, and we will. It's more important to me is the question here than the answer. Jews are troubled here by the social setup, and you could say mysticism for them is a way to get beneath the surface layer of what's going on, to look for some intimate connection with God, to seek reassurance that the Shekhinah is with us, and to look forward to redemption. Now, the intellectual thing is very interesting. Maimonides is considered the great rationalist, right? So Maimonides is the rationalist, and as opposed to that, you have these mystics who really are illogical and irrational. That's often how things were described in Jewish intellectual history until the 20th century. For much of the 19th century, the way it was depicted was, really partly this has to do with the rise of the Reform movement. What is Judaism? Judaism is really ethical humanism. And we have these rituals, but those we can do away with. What Judaism really is teaching is that we should love one another, and that's the Jewish view. Why did that philosophy arise within Judaism? Why was Reform Judaism so important and so positive? Because this was really part of emancipation. Right? Reform realized that if we want Judaism to be accepted in Western Europe, we have to shed some of these medieval trappings, some of the superstitions, some of the supernatural beliefs. If Judaism could be promoted as a rational form of humanism, then it would be easier to integrate Jews into Christian society. Jews would be accepted. So part of the emancipation was shedding this baggage of medieval superstitious ideas. And the most medieval superstitious thing was, even worse than orthodoxy, was mysticism. You could get rid of mysticism, of these crazy beliefs of angels and demons, and that Judaism could just be what makes sense, and we're working for the betterment of the world. That would be the Jews' ticket to integration in Western society. And that was largely successful. But the price that was paid for that was losing the spiritual power of those teachings. So what happened in the 20th century was a reappropriation of the spiritual tradition, but now from a critical perspective. That's why I was saying last night, it's very important not to swallow Kabbalah whole, right? Which some people do. If you believe in Kabbalah, everything will be taken care of. Buy this set of Zohar and your next operation will go successfully. That's kind of the hard sell you get to some of the LA Kabbalah crap. So I think there are great treasures there that were lost as part of that sanitized version of Judaism. But we shouldn't go overboard and say, I believe everything the Zohar says, and redemption is going to come on December 21st, 2012. Okay, getting back to Maimonides. Maimonides is usually held up as the great, Jewish rationalist, and he tried to bring Judaism in line with Aristotle, with Plato. And Kabbalah was obscurantism, was superstition, was belief in these supernatural forces. But it's much more interesting than that, because Maimonides himself, I wouldn't say he was mystical, but he had a deep, deep spiritual side. Maimonides believed in contemplation. The end of his greatest book, The Guide of the Perplexed, is a description of how one should ideally meditate on the divine. To him, that's the most fulfilled existence possible, is for the human mind to meditate on the divine mind. This isn't a Kabbalist speaking, this is Moses Maimonides. So he believed the ultimate goal of human existence was to be in harmony with the divine flow. He actually believed that prophecy was possible in his own day. So that's the Maimonides that the Kabbalists studied. So the Kabbalists are deeply influenced by Maimonides, and as I said last night, the notion of Ein Sof, of God as infinity, is really perfectly in line with how Maimonides described God. But Maimonides had gone to such an extreme in trying to create this abstract view of God that if you believe in Maimonides' view, it's hard to relate to God. There's not really a personal God you can relate to. God is just perfection. God is just, the ultimate order of the universe. There's not God as someone who really interacts with you on a day-to-day basis. And that's why the Kabbalists react against Maimonides, even though they're influenced by him. And they say, ultimately God is, as Maimonides says, the abstract perfection. That's Ein Sof. But then they balanced out with God being even more approachable than in the Torah. You can actually affect God. You can have an effect on God. And one more remarkable thing is that Maimonides' greatest book of philosophy is The Guide of the Perplexed. Right? Somebody once mistranslated that actually as not the guide of the perplexed, the leader of the confused. Maimonides' book, The Guide of the Perplexed, it ends with a description of meditation and contemplation. He wrote that book in Arabic, but it was translated into Hebrew already during his lifetime. The oldest copy in the world of that Hebrew translation of The Guide of the Perplexed, at the very end, the scribe writes, I'm copying this book for Moses de Leon. So the author of the Zohar, Moses de Leon, commissioned a scribe to copy for him the Godhead of Reflect, and it's the oldest copy that exists in the whole world. It's in a library in Moscow. But there's a microfilm of it in Jerusalem, and I've seen it at the end. The guy says Moshe ben Shem Tov de Leon. Moshe, son of Shem Tov de Leon. So that's beautiful. The author of the Zohar owned what is now the oldest copy that exists of Maimonides. So it's not that there's such a sharp opposition, even though they did wrestle with some of the impact of philosophy. That's a rambling beginning of the answer, but it'll be enough for now.
You've given a magnificent Agadah, or myth, as a way of approaching reality. Is it possible to choose from the world of Jewish thought and Agadah a different Agadah that, or in order for us to take science seriously, must we all accept your way of bringing a religious perspective and a scientific perspective together?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, each of us should find some way to integrate the scientific and the spiritual. So this is my attempt. Really, growing up, I grew up as a rabbi's kid, and to me it was always, okay, who has it right? Is it the scientists or is it Torah? Because my father was very open-minded and very, very much wanted to keep up with current trends and reading things, but I really just struggled, who has it right? And then what happened is I got involved and attracted to Kabbalah and Zohar, and I would be teaching Zohar, reading that, and people would come up to me after a lecture and say, this really sounds like the Big Bang. And after I heard that 3 or 4 times, I said, I have to look into this. So then I started reading good popularizations of the Big Bang. I don't have a really strong scientific background, but I read, by really fine physicists, Steven Weinberg, and people like that, what are called popularizations. They're sometimes very hard to get through. People say Steven Weinberg's book, the first 3 minutes, it holds the record for the most copies bought and never read. You start reading it, and it's very challenging. But I would just read one after the other for a while. For a year or so, I read nothing, hardly anything in Kabbalah. All I wanted to do was understand how does cosmology make sense of the origin. So, and then I just tried to work out in what ways, and then you're right, there's more a mythical or poetic. I'm trying to show a resonance between them. I'm not saying, Moses de Leon figured out what Stephen Hawking 700 years later figured out. I'm not saying something that simplistic as you picked up. I'm showing some poetic resonance between these two descriptions. I think we have to navigate between science and religion. So I would encourage everyone to, find your own way to make sense, and the way you're making sense of it to some way is that you're no longer fully planted in one world or the other. Right? It's easy to say, I believe the scientific approach, and this stuff of religion is garbage. Or, I'm a true believer, and I don't want to look at anything scientific. Evolution, some evolution. As long as you're not totally in one camp or the other, and you're wrestling or dancing with these alternatives, that I think is good to do.
Of course, there are scientists like Stephen Gould who think we have 2 magisterium.
Right.
And that really religion has not much to say to science.
Mm-hmm.
But science also deals with a different approach to reality.
Right.
And from Gould's perspective, it's religion's province to deal with that question of meaning.
Of meaning, right. Yes.
And that science cannot give us that.
Right.
So I guess the only thing, as I was listening to you, and I admire your framework magnificently, I don't happen to be a mystic.
Right.
I respect it, admire it, but for example, I don't feel that words are the enemy in terms of mediating our relationship to God. I think that davening and paying attention to the words can lead you to transcendence.
Yes.
But I think that the thing that concerns me is the impression that some people might get is that if we want to be en courant with science, if we want to be sophisticated Jews who take science seriously, there's only one path, and that is to accept the Agadah that you articulated.
No, I definitely want to, to side with you on that. I would say really, there are two possible general approaches. One is to try to find some integration or resonance, and the other is to adopt Gould's position. These both have validity, but they really are separate realms. I think it's almost more a psychological orientation, whether you want one approach or the other. And I happen to be more into the, forging links between them, but I very much respect what you're conveying of Gould because it's at least valuing both. I think that's the main thing, to say each of them is one piece of the puzzle. And the human mind created both these approaches. A modern human should try to respect both of those approaches, either by finding how to integrate them in some way, or bridge them, or to respect them in their separate realms. But one last thing about the words, I'm not saying words are the enemy. I would really say words can take you so far, and then there's something beyond the words. And ideally the words lead you to silence. But then there's something deeper that happens beyond the words.
I would certainly accept that.
Good. Please.
To kind of comment on this, I think we tend to think in linear, rational terms, here's science, here's religion. But what we sometimes fail to see is that there is a middle ground, which is not the addition or not the intersection, but an actual new thing. Just like in a marriage, when you have two people, a new thing is formed. And the people don't disappear. They don't merge into nothingness and become unbroken symmetry. There is a new thing that's created, which is a new entity. And we need to think in terms of science and spirit coming together and actually reforming a new old entity, which is neither science and neither spirit, but a new place.
So we have three options, three general options, and then they're really meant to fight each other. And there are four options, but I would say let's try for one of those three.
Well, not so much fighting. We come to a time where we don't have to fight. That's the point of what you're saying, is that you can see the correspondences.
Right.
And if we don't try to go down to reductionism and fit everything into a box and say, oh, this is the science part and this is the spirit part, but allow for there to be a relaxation of the boundaries, we will create something new.
Good. Maybe one or two more, and then I'll be happy to continue informally with people.
Quick question. The theory of the oneness of the Zohar and the Big Bang, did they influence each other? Or was that totally scientific and this is totally religious? Were there two different paths? Or
yeah, I think the greatest scientists do break through to some realm. I wouldn't call it mysticism. I wouldn't call it religious necessarily. It's something beyond their own limited mind. They somehow can tap into something that they've discovered something of the truth of being. And that truth of being is beyond scientific or religious, or it's equally scientific and religious. But I really want to respond to this by asking you to go to the closest good Jewish library. And is there a library here? I'm sure that library has a book called the Encyclopedia of Judaica. Now, hopefully it has the edition that came out in the 70s, and not the new one that came out a year or two ago. Maybe it has both.
I'm told two.
Huh?
2 copies.
Come, our librarian's right there.
So
we have reference and circulating copies of the 76.
You have it, wonderful. Okay,
yeah, we
so
do not have the new one. I don't
wonderful, all the better. The 76 is better. I want everyone here, the next time we're at the library, please do this. Go to the Encyclopedia of Judaica and look up the volume that has the letter E. And I want you to look up Albert Einstein. Okay, look up Einstein. On the page of Einstein is a nice picture of Albert smiling at you. And right above his head it says, Ein Sof. It just happens to be the preceding entry. In the new edition, it didn't work out very well. That's beautiful to me. To me, Einstein, that's how I want to answer your question. Last question.
We want you later.
Please, both of you. Let's do it.
Here in our Shabbat Simcha, you find an expression of this
Yes.
this image of God that you're talking
This is a
about.
planted question, right? Where in the Shabbat Siddur do you find anything like this? Isn't the Siddur, a good normative Judaism? How does Kabbalah, this alien plant, how does it have any place in Judaism? What's the most beautiful prayer on the Friday night service?
Lord is one.
That's in every service. But Friday night service, what's the most beautiful prayer on the Friday night service? Come, my friend, to greet the bride. Who is that bride? It's Shabbat, it's Jerusalem, it's the Jewish people. Yes, but it's Shekhinah. This is the divine feminine. She's about to be married to the Holy One, blessed be He. Their wedding anniversary, if you think it's hard to remember your wedding anniversary, the wedding anniversary of Shabbat is every Shabbat. Every Shabbat is not the anniversary, every Shabbat is the wedding. Every Shabbat is the wedding of the Shekhinah and the Holy One, blessed be He. Now the Shekhinah includes all of us. Actually, one of Shekhinah's names in the Kabbalah is the Assembly of Israel, the community of Israel. That's a name for the Shekhinah. That's very strange. Is that the people or is it God? Some of the people are the Shekhinah. Each of us is one limb of the Shekhinah. And we, along with her, are married to the Holy One, blessed be He, every Shabbat. And the Chadodi is a love poem in celebration of the divine wedding. Well, what's the last verse? Well, the last phrase, Bo'i Kala, come, O bride, come, O bride. It's asking the Shekhinah to come along with us and be wedded to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. That was written in Tzfat by a Kabbalist in celebration of the mystical Shabbat. So it's a key element of the davening.
God does talk to Israel as a bride. Zacharti lach chesed ne'urai.
Yes, right. Israel is described as the bride, right? Right. And Yirmiyahu, and that the Kabbalah takes that and runs with it. Please, last question.
I didn't mean to draw this out even further. How would the Kabbalists look at the issue of free will versus being absorbed into the oneness so that you don't get into the situation of being divine, but yet still retain your free will and yet becoming or engaging in the oneness?
I knew I should have quit while I was ahead. Yeah, so free will. How can there be free will if we're really part of the divine? I would say that you could picture it this way. God has split itself into millions of pieces. And each of us is one piece of that oneness. But we're here to express that oneness in our own unique way, not just to melt back into this protoplasm of divinity. That's mystical experience, that's mystical oneness. It's nice to do that once in a while, once a day for a moment, at a sunset when you're in love with, and you feel a great love for your spouse, for your child. You have a sense of overcoming the boundary of ego. But other times we are an ego, we are a self. There's something to be celebrated in that uniqueness. So the will is an expression of our own uniqueness, and we should express that divinity, that divine spark in a way that promotes other sparks and helps other sparks. So you could say it's kind of a mystical ethics. You should live your unique life in such a way as not to squelch another, not to extinguish another spark. So it's one way to see the balance between individuality and oneness.
When we say that prayer, that important prayer, we're talking to the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
Yes.
So I was always thinking until you gave this discussion that meant monotheism. God is one God.
Right.
But it also could refer to the oneness.
Very much so. Exactly. That's how the mystics read that prayer. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is oneness. All is one. Right, it says in Deuteronomy, you should know today that God is God in heaven on earth, in heaven above, on earth below, Ein Od. There's no other. Usually translators mean there's no other God, but the Kabbalists read it Ein Od. There's nothing else. There's nothing else. All there is God in these manifold ways.